This is the ASUS ROG Ally, and it is by far the most powerful handheld PC that you can purchase, at least in a store. There are other handhelds from AIA and other Chinese manufacturers using the same chipset, the Z1 Extreme from AMD, though you can expect tremendous shipping delays, exuberant prices, and issues with customer service due to everything being run overseas. If you're looking for an alternative to the Steam Deck, this is your safest option, but how does it compare, and is it really worth its price tag of $700 US? Before we get into it, a like and a sub to the channel is always appreciated. It really does mean a lot when you all show your support, and it does help the channel a ton. So thank you. Anyways, when I first took the ROG Ally out of the box, I was quite surprised, not only by the aggressive and clean hardware itself, but the in-hand feel and the weight of the device was much different from what I was expecting. From images I'd seen, I was certain that it would be uncomfortable or heavy, but I'm glad that it really couldn't be further from the truth. At 608 grams compared to the Steam Deck's 670, you can really feel the difference. And when it comes to long play sessions, which we will have to talk about later, at least in the hands, you don't feel as strained. It's much easier and far more comfortable to play the Ally, at least for me, especially considering the layout that ASUS chose for its face buttons. With the deck, you do have two touchpads, which is amazing for specific games that aren't quite there when it comes to controller support, as well as navigating the desktop environment. Though it's a double-edged sword, because of where the touchpads are placed, it actually forced Valve to cramp the face buttons and the analog sticks to the upper area of the device. And while it is usable, it took a very long time for me to get the hang of it, and going from the Steam Deck to another controller like the Xbox, it really messed me up. With the Ally, there's no relearning anything. You can just pick it up and play, and it feels natural to do so. All the buttons feel great. They're really responsive, they have a nice click to them, the thumbsticks are smooth with almost no dead zone despite not having Hall sensing potentiometers, and the triggers, as well as the remappable buttons on the back, just feel great. When it comes to controlling the Ally in games, I think ASUS really nailed it. It's familiar and it's just really practical. However, the lack of touchpads does make navigating Windows a little challenging. Due to the ROG Ally not running off of SteamOS and being an entirely Windows-based handheld, it could make simple tasks like downloading game launchers to be quite the pain. Although you are able to easily configure the desktop control scheme or navigate Windows in its preset out-of-the-box tablet mode. I will say that I personally haven't really had any issues. A big reason for this though is due to the M1 and 2 buttons on the rear being mapped amazingly in desktop mode. Holding both down while pressing up, down, left, or right on the D-pad gives you various functions like showing your desktop, task view, and even task manager in case you need to close out of a game that's crashed. At the top of the device, there's also a 3.5mm combo jack, the ROG XG mobile interface for proprietary external GPU support, a UHS 2 microSD card reader for easy expansion to the internal storage, as well as a USB 3.2 Gen 2 port with DisplayPort 1.4. The device also has Wi-Fi 6E, which I found to be pretty decent, two speakers that are front firing, which to be honest sound actually incredible, and you have a built-in microphone. The Ally also comes with a 65-watt AC adapter as opposed to 45 with the Steam Deck, which thankfully does charge the handheld quite quickly, because you will expect to plug this thing in religiously if you do plan to play heavy AAA titles. All in all, my experience with the handheld so far has been absolutely fantastic, except for the out-of-box experience. And I felt like this was worth adding in case you pick one up, at least you'll know what to expect. There were a couple caveats, like the fact that Windows didn't automatically show the keyboard when trying to type in my credentials like the Wi-Fi password during setup, and tons of games just outright not launching or crashing because of DirectX errors. With the Wi-Fi password, thankfully it was an easy fix. You simply hold those mappable rear buttons and press the D-pad up to bring up your keyboard. Though there was nothing actually telling you how to do this within the setup, so I did have to Google it on my own. Thankfully, it wasn't really a big deal though. The games, however, took quite a bit of troubleshooting. Turns out there are actually BIOS updates that were absolutely needed, as well as tons of various Windows updates that hadn't been pushed through. I suggest the first thing you do with the Ally is go ahead and check your Windows updates, make sure it automatically does those BIOS updates on restarts, because you won't really have a great experience with the device if you don't do so. How's the gaming experience though? Because that's why you're buying a device like this. Honestly, it's nothing short of fantastic. It really is the most powerful handheld PC that I've used, and depending on the situation, blows the Steam Deck out of the water. I will preface this though and make your pickings just a little easier if you're choosing between the two. The Ally runs Windows, which by default is where most games and anti-cheat services are designed to run, meaning you can quite literally play anything on here as long as it's within the system requirements. On the deck, games like Call of Duty simply cannot run due to the anti-cheat not working on Linux. Though putting Windows on the deck is possible, it's still not going to give you the experience the Ally does in terms of performance. Now, with that out of the way, I've played a handful of games on it and I've been having a blast. Thanks to the blazing fast SoC with 16 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM and a PCI 4.0 SSD, performance has been actually spectacular. Call of Duty running at 720p gets me 90 frames per second on 30 watts plugged in, though I could maintain 60 if I decided to run it at 15 watts. If you do want to kill your battery, you can run it unplugged at turbo 25 watts, and you will still get about 80 frames per second. I find that to be pushing it a little too hard though, because you will be killing that battery in about an hour or an hour and a half. Games like Forza Horizon, Overwatch, etc. all run fantastic too, though much like the Steam Deck, where the portability of this APU really shines is with those older titles or indie games that aren't taxing on that APU. Games like Dead Cells, for example, is a game that I could run at a very low TDP and still push in excess of 120 frames per second, allowing me to truly take advantage of the display on the Ally, which is 120 Hz with FreeSync Premium. And I think this is where the handheld really does a lot better for me over the Steam Deck. I did most of my gaming on the Steam Deck at home and plugged in just to play for extended periods. I could get the same experience unplugged, but I choose to just for the battery life constraints. Though with the Ally, there's a real benefit to being plugged in. The display alone is worth keeping tethered to a wall or a portable battery bank by pushing that 30 watt TDP, allowing me to play twitchy shooters and feel like I'm actually able to be competitive. I'm not saying that the Ally is overall better than the Steam Deck, but in my experience, I would say that I prefer it over the deck just because of 120 Hz and other things like the controller, for example. But the battery life is terrible to say the least. 1 to 1.5 hours, like I said, is what I've come to expect when it comes to playing AAA titles. And I think most people will experience the same unless you really dive in and make in-game profile settings for your wattage specifically for the games that you're playing. Though I think with how readily available the Ally is, it's very easy to prejudge and say that everyone knows what they're doing with this device. Truth is, most people who buy it probably won't be playing around with setting up game profiles. And I think the deck handles this much better, showing you games that'll give you a great experience out of the box with a solid and strong community behind it that'll be able to give you tips for settings and specific titles along the way. However, battery life aside, I think when it comes to hardware, although it would be kind of a difficult thing choosing between the two, if I had to pick one, I would hands down pick the Ally. Factors like the control scheme, the display, and the sheer power and how I'm not limited by SteamOS for games that I want to and actually play on a daily basis is a no-brainer for me. Though I would honestly really like to hear what you all have to think about the Ally if you've had a chance to play with one, if you own it, or if you're planning on picking one up, because honestly, with the time that I've spent with this thing, it's been really fun to play with and mess around with, so I'm really excited to see how my time with it goes on the longer that I get to play with it. Anyways, that's been it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like down below, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.